Well, the mesh business is really a way of talking about a fundamental shift in our relationship to goods, services, and talent, both in our personal lives and also in our business and the way that we think about it in business. It's essentially a shift away from this idea that we need to own everything, whether that's the employment of many people with different with a diversity of background, or it could be factories, partnerships, all sorts of things. From a business perspective, intellectual property. So the last century was a very much an orientation towards ownership. That was the mentality in all aspects. Certainly from a business perspective, we felt that owning things. So we were just talking about, you and I, before we started talking officially, we were speaking about Kodak. And I think Kodak is a very good example of what can go wrong when you hold on to an ownership model too tightly for too long. Because they own the cows to make the bones, to make the agar, to make the film that now no one buys. And so there's a kind of flexibility and a temporality and a responsiveness that's inherent in mesh businesses that I think is a huge advantage for both customers, well, for all three: customers, stakeholders, and the company itself. Mesh businesses is a fairly horizontal concept. I think that it can be applied, and we see it being applied across at least 30 different categories. Before I forget to mention, we run a kind of pulse of the share economy at meshing.it, meshing.it, like Italy. And there is a global directory and community of various mesh businesses. So you can see in things like food and fashion and finance, as well as transportation and energy, all of those areas and many more are creating interesting ways to basically convert unused value, which I consider to be waste, because if we have something that we value, like our car or intellectual property, that we're not using, then in fact it's being wasted. And if we could create more access to that, if we could actually open it up to a bigger marketplace, then we'll discover that there are other people who would see that, at least in a temporal way, as real value. So the business is really organized around access, where access to goods and services is the prominent offer. And examples of that, since we're speaking in France and about France a little bit, Buzzcar, for example, my friend and colleague Robin Chase, who's a really well-known thinker and entrepreneur with Zipcar, has started a peer-to-peer car-sharing service. So both the Zipcar is a good example of where access triumphs over ownership. You can have access to something that is expensive and pay for only what you use. And so one of the big movements within the mesh economy or the share economy is, for example, co-working. And so in France, there's places like La Cantine that is, hosting many different kinds of people doing different work. There's an international network called Loose Cubes that it's kind of a network of co-working spaces, so that if I move from Barcelona to Paris to Istanbul in 2 weeks, I can actually find where there might be an available desk for me using, from my mobile phone app, from my Loose Cubes mobile phone app. And so to me, the technology is really an important piece, because the technology of the mobile phone with GPS and in some cases QR code ability and other sorts of technologies, different sorts of sensors, is enabling our ability to track physical objects and people moving through time and space. And that technology is a big driver, coupled with the internet in general, the web. That's a big driver to really remove a lot of the friction, remove the resistance I'm particularly fascinated right now with cities. I'm looking at cities because one of the big drivers to the share economy and to many of the things that we're seeing in the world is population density. That is, the predictions are that 75% of the world's population, which is predicted to be 9.3 billion people in 2050, those 75% of those people, so the same number of people who are on the planet today, will be living in cities. And that means that more people in the same physical space, it just invites us to realize that can only have less things. We can't have the same amount of things taking up the same space when there's so many more people. At the same time, we don't want to have a less happy life. We don't want to have less rich experiences. On the contrary, we want to have more rich experiences. And so the mesh is a really interesting platform for thinking about how do we enhance the richness of our lives and the richness of our day-to-day world, at the same time to realize that there is this other thing taking place. So I look at, for example, we talked about mobility, car sharing, bike sharing, walking, just finding transportation in a variety of ways. The whole area of mobility is very rich. The whole area of health and fitness and wellness also, because we're going to start to see ways that people can use their mobile phones to remind them to do certain things, whether that's to sit up straight or to eat at a certain time or to go outside and breathe air from not inside the building or whatever. There's a lot of work that's happening around open data, both in terms of transportation and health. And I'm optimistic that we'll start to see that trend in other places. Also, but it applies to many different areas. One of the mesh strategies that I'm very fond of, and I think that so far the world seems to be very fond of, is crowdsourcing. And that is that we see big companies and small ones like KissKissBankBank and Ulule, who are doing a crowdfunding model in France. There are many other things that are happening around the world. Flink in Germany, for example, is in a way crowdsourcing rides by offering up different kinds of different cars with capacity to carry additional passengers. And they're actually running it as a crowdsourcing platform. So it's quite interesting. And I think that crowdsourcing, we're starting to see that model being used by very large companies as well. So for example, GE, General Electric, created the Eco-Imagination Challenge, and they gave away $200 million because they realized that a lot of the innovation for renewable energy is going to happen from inventors and designers outside of their own company. And if they want to have some participation in this and really be one of the main players, they need to embrace the idea that perhaps the best people to solve the problem that you're trying to work on, they don't work for you. And so how do you engage and seduce those people to think with you together, or at least to bring their best ideas to you? And so crowdsourcing is a really interesting part of the value chain within the mesh economy. So I just want to say thank you very much. I'm sorry that I can't be there. I would love to meet you all and participate in your event. I'm looking forward, hopefully, to joining in another year when you continue with lemobile. But for now, thank you so much for inviting me in this way, and I hope to speak with you or meet you soon.